Let's start our first news with a matchup that is already creating plenty of debate in the welterweight division. Michael Morales has made his position very clear on Ian Garry's chances against Islam Makhachev. And according to Morales, those chances are almost non-existent. For weeks, the welterweight division had multiple contenders waiting for their opportunity. Morales appeared to be one of the strongest candidates. He even shared pictures with Hunter Campbell and repeatedly suggested that he had received confirmation that he would be next. But despite all those signs, the UFC ultimately went in a different direction and booked Islam against Ian Garry. Morales was recently asked about the matchup during an interview with Danny Segura from MMA Junkie, and his prediction was brutal. He believes Garry has essentially zero chance of defeating Islam. Morales explained that Garry would need to land a devastating shot to completely change the fight. Otherwise, he expects Islam to follow the same strategy that has made him so successful throughout his career. According to Morales, Islam will likely use his striking to create openings before going for the takedown. Once the fight reaches the ground, Morales believes Islam's control, positioning, and pressure could make things extremely difficult for Garry. In fact, Morales went as far as predicting that the fight could spend almost the entire 5 rounds on the ground, or potentially end before the final bell. His reasoning is simple. Islam has built his entire career around controlling opponents, taking them down, and dominating from advantageous positions. Unless Garry can produce something special on the feet, Morales sees very little that could stop that game plan. With UFC 330 approaching, the matchup is becoming one of the most closely watched fights in the division, and Morales clearly believes Islam remains the overwhelming favorite. Move on to another news, and this one could be a major development for UFC 331. For weeks, there has been plenty of speculation surrounding a potential matchup between Arman and Charles Oliveira. Now, new reports suggest that the fight could be in the works to headline UFC 331 in Los Angeles, California. According to a report from Red Corner MMA on X, sources indicate that a fight between Arman and former UFC lightweight champion Charles Oliveira is currently being discussed as the event's headliner. What makes this situation even more interesting is the ongoing talk about whether the matchup would be for the BMF belt. At this point, it does not appear that the BMF title will be on the line. There has been no clear explanation for why the UFC would choose not to give Arman an opportunity at the BMF championship, especially if he is potentially headlining the event. But for now, that appears to be the direction things are moving. Another important detail involves the original UFC 331 plans. Joshua Van and Alexandre Pantoja were previously expected to headline the event in a flyweight title fight. If these latest reports are accurate, Arman versus Oliveira could now join that matchup as a co-main attraction or potentially share top billing. That would give UFC 331 a very interesting lineup, with 2 major fights potentially leading the card. Of course, none of this should be treated as officially confirmed until the UFC makes an announcement. Rumors and reports can change quickly, especially when fights are still being negotiated. Still, the possibility of Arman facing Oliveira is certainly one that could have major implications for the lightweight division. And there is more developing around Arman. In a recent interview, he was also asked about how his wife reacts when he flirts with her on camera, adding another entertaining moment to the growing attention surrounding him. Move on to another news, because Demetrious Johnson has delivered a strong message to the UFC regarding Usman Nurmagomedov. Usman recently competed in the final fight of his current PFL contract, and his future has quickly become one of the biggest talking points in MMA. There has been growing speculation that the undefeated lightweight could make the jump to the UFC, especially after Dana White appeared noticeably positive when asked about the possibility. Nothing has been officially confirmed yet, but Demetrious Johnson believes the UFC should do whatever it takes to get the deal done. Johnson argued that if he were in Dana White's position, he would pay Usman whatever he wants to bring him over before the PFL merger situation develops further. His reasoning is simple. Signing Usman would mean taking a major star away from another organization. Usman also represents a much bigger MMA family and team. The group includes Khabib, Abubakar, Islam, Umar, and several highly respected coaches and teammates. Johnson believes that entire connection could make Usman an extremely valuable addition to the UFC roster. The other major factor is competition. Usman has already accomplished a lot in the PFL, and if his goal is to test himself against the best lightweights in the world, the UFC would give him an entirely different level of opposition. The division is packed with dangerous names, including Justin Gaethje, Arman, and other elite contenders. That creates several blockbuster possibilities if Usman eventually makes the move. Usman is currently undefeated at 22-0, which makes his potential UFC arrival even more intriguing. The promotion could have a huge opportunity to make an immediate statement with his debut. One particularly interesting possibility would be a matchup with Ilya. Considering the existing tension surrounding Islam and Ilya, some fans have already started imagining a scenario where Usman enters the UFC against one of the biggest names in the division. Of course, that would be a huge fight for a debut, and nothing suggests it has actually been booked. But with Usman's undefeated record and championship credentials, the UFC would have plenty of options. Money will obviously be a major part of any negotiation, but Usman may also want something beyond a massive contract. As a PFL champion, he could potentially push for a high-profile opponent immediately, with names like Ilya, Arman, or Paddy potentially entering the conversation. At the same time, staying with the PFL could offer financial advantages after the merger. But the biggest question surrounding that decision is what it means for Usman's legacy. If he remains outside the UFC, he could potentially miss opportunities to compete against some of the biggest names of his generation. That makes his next career decision one of the most important choices of his professional career. Move on to another news, because Merab is already deep into a training camp for his highly anticipated rematch with Petr Yan. The former UFC bantamweight champion has made it clear that this time his preparation is going to be very different. During a recent training update, Merab explained that the session went extremely well. Instead of simply pushing himself as hard as possible, he is focusing on specific positions and situations that he expects to face against Petr. According to Merab, this training camp finally feels like a real fight camp. He and his team are spending more time communicating, studying the details, and making sure every part of the preparation has a purpose. That approach is especially important because Merab believes his previous preparation for Petr was based too heavily on simply working harder. Last time, he says, he was constantly pushing himself and putting in enormous amounts of physical work. But this time, he wants to be more intelligent with his training. The goal is no longer just to train harder, it is to train smarter. Merab believes that change could make a major difference when he steps back into the octagon against Petr. Their first fight was already a significant chapter in Merab's career, and the rematch gives him an opportunity to correct what he believes went wrong and show how much he has developed since then. The former champion is clearly approaching this matchup with a different mindset. Rather than relying entirely on his relentless pace and physical pressure, he is working on specific positions, improving his decision-making, and preparing for the situations that Petr could create during the fight. And there is one goal that stands above everything else. Merab wants his belt back. He made it clear that he intends to regain the championship and then continue staying active instead of slowing down after the fight. For Merab, this is about more than simply winning a rematch. It is about proving that the lessons from the previous fight have been absorbed and that his preparation has evolved. His message is straightforward. The last camp was about working hard, but this camp is about working smart. Now, with training already underway, Merab appears completely focused on Petr and on reclaiming what he believes belongs to him. The rematch is becoming more personal, more strategic, and potentially one of the most important fights of Merab's career. Move on to another news, because Khamzat apparently has his eyes set on a Strickland rematch. After his previous fight with Sean Strickland, there was plenty of speculation about what Khamzat would do next. At one point, the plan appeared to be moving up to light heavyweight and potentially facing Jiri Prochazka. However, the UFC eventually changed direction and decided that a rematch with Strickland was a more appealing option because of the attention surrounding the matchup. Now, according to Khamzat's coach, there's another important factor that played a major role in how everything unfolded, and that was the weight cut. In a recent interview with Red Corner MMA, Khamzat's coach explained that the original plan was for Khamzat to compete at 205 pounds against Garry. Because of that, the team was preparing his body for a completely different challenge. Khamzat had started gaining muscle and putting on more weight than he normally would. The entire preparation was focused around competing at light heavyweight. Then, everything suddenly changed. Instead of fighting at 205 pounds, Khamzat was informed that he would need to return to 185 pounds and face Strickland. That left the team with very little time to adjust. According to his coach, the sudden change created more problems than they had originally expected. Khamzat had already been increasing his size and preparing his body for a higher weight class. So dropping back down to middleweight became a major challenge. The weight cut became one of the biggest issues heading into the fight. But perhaps the most interesting part of the update is what happened after the fight. Khamzat's coach revealed that since the matchup with Strickland, Khamzat has reportedly been constantly texting his manager because he wants the rematch. That detail shows just how strongly Khamzat feels about getting another opportunity against Strickland. Instead of moving on to another opponent, he appears to be focused on settling things with the former middleweight title challenger. There is also a clear reason why this rematch could make sense from Khamzat's perspective. He now understands the physical demands of preparing for Strickland, and his team would have more time to plan specifically for a middleweight camp. The previous preparation involved a sudden change from 205 to 185 pounds, but a second camp could be completely different. For now, the rematch is not officially confirmed. But if Khamzat continues pushing his manager for another fight with Strickland, this is a situation worth watching closely. Move on to another news, because Islam Makhachev has made a confident statement about what separates him from the rest of the division. Islam has never been shy about discussing his preparation, work ethic, and mentality. But this time, he explained why he believes it would be extremely difficult for another fighter to simply outwork him. During a recent interview, Islam was asked about whether he can be beaten. His response was interesting because he did not claim that nobody could ever defeat him. Instead, he acknowledged that fighters can beat him, but then pointed to one major factor that gives him confidence. For Islam, the question is not simply about talent, technique, or physical ability. It comes down to WHO is willing to train harder than him. Islam explained that he constantly tells people that fighters can beat him. He understands that MMA is unpredictable, and any opponent can potentially find a way to win. But when it comes to preparation, Islam believes he has an advantage. He said he does not believe there is anyone who trains more than he does. That belief has become a major part of his mentality. Islam feels that his preparation gives him confidence before he even steps inside the octagon. He believes he is mentally ready, physically ready, and prepared to compete against anybody. And that mindset is especially important at the highest level of the sport. At this stage of his career, Islam has already faced elite competition and spent years developing his wrestling, grappling, striking, conditioning, and overall fight IQ. But rather than relying only on his natural abilities, he continues to emphasize preparation. For Islam, being talented is not enough. He wants to know that when fight night arrives, he has already done everything possible inside the gym. That is where his confidence comes from. If an opponent wants to beat him, Islam believes they cannot simply match his skills. They also have to match his level of preparation. And according to Islam himself, that is where things become extremely difficult. His mentality is straightforward. Anyone can potentially beat him, but he does not believe anyone is willing to work harder than he does. That confidence could become especially important as he continues facing some of the most dangerous fighters in the division. Islam knows that every opponent will bring something different, but he believes his preparation allows him to be ready for whatever comes his way. For him, the fight does not begin when the cage door closes. It begins long before that, during the countless hours of training that build his physical and mental confidence. And if Islam continues believing that nobody can outwork him, That mindset could remain one of his biggest weapons. Move on to another news, because we have several new UFC fights officially announced. First up, Elvis Brenner is set to face Josiah Harrell on a UFC Vegas card scheduled for September 26th. Brenner joined the UFC back in 2023 and immediately made an impression, winning his first 3 fights inside the promotion. However, things have taken a very different direction since then. He is currently riding a 3-fight losing streak. His most recent appearance came against Esteban Ribovics in a fight of the night matchup, but Brenner ultimately lost that fight by unanimous decision. Now, he will be looking to stop the slide and get back into the win column. Meanwhile, Harrell joined the UFC this year with an undefeated 11-0 professional record. Unfortunately, his promotional debut did not go according to plan. He faced Jacoby Smith and suffered the first loss of his professional career after being stopped by TKO in the first round. That makes this matchup particularly interesting, with both fighters looking to bounce back. Next, Marcel Dorff reported that Francisco Prado will face Artem Mainov on a UFC Vegas card scheduled for October 10th. For Prado, this is a huge fight. He currently sits at 1-5 inside the UFC and is also riding a 4-fight losing streak. His most recent loss came against Charles Ratke at UFC 327, where he dropped a unanimous decision. Prado desperately needs a victory if he wants to turn things around and remain on the UFC roster. His opponent, Mainov, also enters the matchup looking for his first UFC win. Before joining the promotion, he was undefeated at 7-0 in professional MMA. However, his UFC debut ended in disappointment when he faced Tommy Gant and suffered a second-round TKO loss. Now, both fighters have something to prove. With Prado fighting to end his losing streak and Mainov trying to recover from his difficult debut, this could turn into one of those sneaky, entertaining fights on the card.